Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now, your host, Gugan Sanger.
Hello, and welcome to Trend Detection, powered by Siemens. On today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Nat Ford at Siemens, where we are going to be discussing the topic around the state of readiness of predictive maintenance in the UK region. So big thank you to Nat for joining me on today's episode. If you could start off by introducing yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, nice. Hi, nice to see you again. I'm Nathaniel. I've been with Senseye for about 5 years. In fact, I've been with Senseye for 5 years, and whatever date we are today, minus 14. You can work that out. It's about 5 years and 2 weeks.
I was going to work it out, a bit difficult for me.
And when we were Senseye, I was responsible for selling, regardless of title. So our job was to go out and find organisations who are looking for predictive maintenance and to help them go through a journey of understanding what that means, and then hopefully to select us to provide their service or to provide their technology. And now that we're part of Siemens, and now that we have the whole Siemens portfolio and people and marketing and network salespeople, etc., we work more on business development. So pretty much the same vision, but the mission is to get other people to bring us into opportunities or to help them to do the thing that we were doing before. So similar outcome sort, but on a more macro scale because we're now Siemens.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining me on this episode. Let's get started into this topic. And the first question I've got really, Nat, is just around what do we actually mean when it comes to the state of readiness of predictive maintenance?
That's a good question. And when we were discussing it earlier, I thought, hang on a minute. How do I know that my understanding is the same as everybody else's?
Yeah.
So with the caveat that I may be barking up the wrong tree completely, I think that when we talk about state of readiness, we're talking generally about a market, in this case UK, and where that market is generally in their understanding of a given technology, in this case predictive maintenance, and how ready they are to actually go and assess it and buy it and onboard it and use it. And there's a number of facets within those stages that we can talk about today.
Yeah.
But I think at its purest level, it is exactly as it says on the tin. It's, what is the state of readiness in terms of ability to go out, understand and procure and deploy a solution?
Okay, no, that makes sense. And there was also, just adding on to that, there seems to be talk around data and cultural readiness.
Yes.
This comes up quite frequently, to be honest. So it'd be great for you just to go into a bit more detail into those elements and what that means as well. Okay,
so if we think about all of the things that have to happen for someone to go from either a client, either a whole culture or an individual organisation to go from not using predictive maintenance to using it and becoming ready on that journey, they need data, right? So this is all the predictive maintenance, all predictive maintenance solutions are premised on some kind of data coming from somewhere. So you have to have data. And there will be various different levels of readiness around that. Some people will have no data. Some people will have data hidden away within their machines, within their PLCs. Some will have lots of sensors deployed, but no kind of meaningful plan of how to use them. Or maybe a plan they had gone wrong and now they're just left with a legacy. One thing we don't come across so much now, but we did 5 years ago, was companies that had collected huge quantities of data thinking that would make them uber ready. But actually they weren't ready at all. They just had a database full of badly marked up data that they probably couldn't use. So that's the data side. Culture side is the stuff that happens when things come out of a solution like predictive maintenance. So how ready are you as a culture? Actually there's another level to this, but if we look at that end, how ready are you as a culture to use the output of that data? Do you have maintenance staff? In the case of predictive maintenance, do you have maintenance staff who are going to be willing, capable, and incentivized to use a product? Or are you going to run a project and then find the project dies a death because there's no user uptake? There's another bit in the middle with the people, which is about how ready are you as an organisation to be able to actually be mature enough to go and ask the market, come on, what have you got? Let's see all the vendors. Do you have enough maturity within your business or readiness within your business to ask the right questions, to run a project successfully, to communicate internally and get your budgets and your sign-offs and your buy-ins from all the different departments? So yeah, I think so. data is the ability to have the readiness of data. With people, there's the readiness and the maturity to be able to assess, and then the readiness to be able to use. So they would be the rough 3 areas, I guess.
3 areas, yeah. And out of those 3 areas, do you see a trend, or is there one which seems to come up more frequently out of those?
Okay, so if you think 5 years ago, people were quite low on the data readiness, and there were definitely companies were quite low on the readiness and ability to and kind of wherewithal for the buying and assessing. Those two have changed. So over the last 5 years, we've seen more people who've either had failed projects with other vendors or other projects, or they've gone down a condition monitoring route, which means that they have invested in some kind of sensing technology. The market, I think, has moved towards being more cognizant of what's needed from a data perspective. In terms of maturity or readiness, it's quite binary. So I think more companies are ready, but I don't think that as a country we've moved forward. I think that more companies have either been through a process already, or they've recruited people who've been through processes already. I'll give you an example. I was speaking to I'll give you an example in a minute. I was speaking to an organisation this morning who are in food and beverage.
Okay.
And the chap I was speaking to had come from 2 organisations previously that were quite mature in their processes, all 3 of them: usage, selection and data. And he'd come to this organisation that I was speaking to and was quite taken aback by how unready they were.
Okay.
So there's a case of a ready, I don't know, we're getting to the minute side, but a person who was ready within a culture, within a business that's not quite ready. But the irony of that is that unready business is one of our major clients, and I'm not going to mention who they are. So within that organisation, there are some areas that are so ready that they're using our product successfully, and other areas, other factories, where everybody knows each other, but other factories are not ready yet.
Yeah.
So therefore, you can say that any kind of statistics about readiness are slightly misleading, because they don't, like all statistics, they apply to groups, not to individuals. So even with an individual company, you can have a range of readiness.
Yeah.
So the state of readiness of the companies, the selection process of data, yes, those 2 things are coming up. But I think the thing that we miss talking about, or we don't talk about enough, is the state of readiness of maintenance teams. And actually, I think, oddly, that hasn't evolved as much. Companies have become much more digitally minded, or either in an investigative way or a real way. They've necessarily got back to the data bit, but the individuals who actually this products are for, in terms of usage, are not any readier than they were. And we need to be wary of that, because it means that our projects are getting slicker, therefore probably a bit more intimidating for the potential end users. So we need to make sure that we take them on that journey with their customer, with their client, which can be difficult because they're not your client in the sales process, so you can't insist on them bringing various individuals in, but that's my job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and like you said, it really depends when this topic does come up around the state of readiness. I want to say that it is a work in progress.
Yes.
It is a step-by-step transition, and you might not be 100% ready, but I think because when it comes to predictive maintenance, you have to look at the bigger picture, and you have to be in a position where you are willing to take risks.
Yeah, no, you're right that you can't have one size fits all, but the same as with shoes, you can't have one size fits all. But we don't trial them. Well, you do, you walk around the shop in them and but you don't test the concept of shoes.
Yeah.
You know that it's going to work, you just need to work out which one's going to fit you. And I think we're getting to that point with some individuals. So certainly I speak to individuals who have probably worked at a company where they had a mature, well-deployed predictive maintenance solution, probably from Senseye, and they go to another company, and it's frustrating for them. They know where that company should be, and hopefully they affect that company with their readiness, and they stop. So you'll see more and more. In fact, I'm going to talk about it tomorrow. You'll see more and more us bidding for big business rather than trials and POCs.
Yeah.
And where people are making statements about the things they want we're answering an RFP, or so an RFI this week, which makes some very clear statements about things in a language that we understand.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. But that's not in the UK, so it's not pertinent to the...
Well, you beat me to it, Nat. So just moving on to that question, what is the state of readiness of predictive maintenance in the UK region? What does that look like?
Okay, so that's another one where I think, oh, hang on, are my observations significant enough? Are they a measure of the readiness of the country, or just some of the people I've met who aren't representative of the whole country? That's my disclaimer. The UK, let's compare it to something. We all thought that countries like Germany were going to be very ready when they weren't. And that's changed over time. They've steadily got readier. I think in the UK, there's generally been an acceptance that predictive maintenance is a valid way forward, but there's been quite a slow uptake, and I can't describe exactly what the reasons for that are. There's some of the tedious and obvious things like COVID, but then that was global, so that should not account for differences in countries. I think that we're going to see more deployments over the next 12 months in the UK, and I think that they will encourage the readiness. Let's take this benchmark of people not wanting to do trials, etc. I like that as a measure.
Okay.
I think that we could. Okay, so where are we in the UK in terms of reaching that point? I don't think that we're that far off.
Okay.
In terms of day-to-day, how ready are the companies? There's some companies out there who don't know how to spell predictive maintenance, and there's some companies out there who've been using solutions successfully for a number of years. It's really difficult to pin down a general level.
I mean, it depends, doesn't it? Like you said, when it does come to predictive maintenance, I've always said that it's a work in progress. You know, ROI is not something that's going to happen overnight. It takes time. So in order to deploy predictive maintenance for your assets or machines, you can't expect to get results just like that.
No.
So it's a risk that you have to be willing to take as an organisation.
But on that note, that way of viewing it sort of ties into the idea that we're not ready yet. Because, you know, it's a crass analogy, but if you take insurance, I've been paying house insurance and I hope I never have to claim on it.
Yeah.
I don't need to wait to claim on it to prove and demonstrate to myself that it works. I make the assumption that it works. And there's a lot of situations where we provide predictive maintenance where it's not a day-to-day thing of getting value.
Yeah.
It's about knowing that this 24/7 intelligent process is looking at all of your machines and will raise your attention to the early signs of degradation. But in many situations you don't want there to be degradation. It's not that you've got 40% downtime and you're trying to make that 20% downtime. There's lots of situations where you don't have downtime and you don't ever want downtime. And a solution like Senseye helps to safeguard that and makes your maintenance program more efficient, etc. But I just reacted to your point about the idea that you have to wait for a while for it to pay for itself. It pays for itself just by being there, in the same way that insurance does.
Yeah.
Although it's not giving you a return, it sort of is giving you a return because you've got peace of mind that should anything happen.
That's what it is.
then you're okay. Yeah.
Well, you touched on safeguard, and I think just to add on to that as well is looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So, like you said, it's like a safety net. We have got Senseye Predictive Maintenance, and it's going to assist with the long-term bigger picture that we have.
Yeah.
Which is to avoid failures.
Yes.
So
that point makes me think of something else as well. We'll know that a country, a region, a person, a company, whatever, is really ready when they're doing stuff that we hadn't thought of, when they're taking the evolution of the usage of predictive maintenance. And I was talking this week about one of our clients who use the very fact that they've got predictive maintenance when they're speaking to their underwriters of their insurance contracts, because as part of their portfolio of things that they can talk about and demonstrate to show that they're in control of managing the health and longevity of their assets, Senseye plays an important part of that. And not because people are reacting to cases, but because it's there as an early warning sign of change that might lead to degradation. So even if cases are never raised, the very fact of it being there reduces their overall insurance exposure. We don't pitch that. We don't have that on our manuals. We don't talk about insurance reductions. It's a brilliant use case, and probably you can imagine that more companies will do that as they start having it as a standard, either Senseye or predictive maintenance, as a standard default solution in place, something that you always have there on all of your assets. Then absolutely, that could become a global use case.
Yeah.
But I'd say that shows a remarkable level of a maturity of readiness.
It's just it's a different way to look at it, isn't it?
Yes.
If you think about it, just different perspective, as opposed to just your kind of standard way to look at predictive maintenance and what the main focus is for it. So
Yeah.
so that just takes me into my next question now around what are the key challenges customers within the UK are facing when it comes to deploying predictive maintenance?
Well, I think that they're not UK specific.
Okay.
Unless you compare it to somewhere like, our deployments in China are going to be really problematic for a number of reasons. We'll solve those issues. Same again with different regions and different rules about data. But within the area that I look after, so within the EMEA, I'd say that the problems faced by the uptake of PDM don't differ from the UK, so we can talk generically.
So that takes me to my next question around what are the key challenges that customers are facing when it comes to deploying predictive maintenance?
Can I assume when you say deploy, you mean anything leading up to deployment?
Yes.
Fine. Good. Well, I mean, some of the one things we were going to discuss today was readiness. I think we were normally speaking about readiness in the UK, but I think we realised in discussion over it that it's very different. It's not. The trends tend to be region-wide, so let's speak for EMEA. I think generally the trends are the same. You'll see some nuanced stuff, but think about the challenges leading up to a successful deployment. They're definitely the same, and they start with that middle thing. So forget data for a moment. That middle idea of readiness, of the ability to go and scan the market and look for solutions. That's quite hard, It's harder now than it has been because there's so many companies out there. So before you get to the point of deployment, you need to have people in your business who have the wherewithal and the ability, the investigative ability to go and think about what their requirements are and what are you going to do with this stuff. Not leave it up to the market to sort of market some magic at you, but be serious about thinking about use cases, boil those down, look for companies that can probably address them, get those companies to speak to you, learn the kind of questions you need to ask. And all of that process is really about, first of all, gaining an understanding of what the state of play is now for predictive maintenance and the various different approaches, and working out how to verbalise them, working out what the potential return on investment is, and then having a business case. Because when you're buying this type of solution, it's not a question of, I've got a bit of budget, I'll pay for it. It will undoubtedly involve the engineering department, the IT department, the OT department, if you have that division, plant managers, finance. It's complex.
I mean, there's just so many stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as just having, just a team of people.
No.
Each department is very integral to when it does come to deploying predictive maintenance.
And each department will have a novel way of viewing the benefits of such a project. But also, let's be cynical, because they'll be cynical. Each department will have their own justifiable reason for saying, no, let's not do this project. And so they have to, a company has to have within it representatives who can navigate that white water and get a project through.
Okay.
And part of that means finding companies I'd like to think like us and like people like me and John and other people in the team who can help them to ask all the right questions and to go through that process. So that's the first challenge, getting an understanding of what it is they want to do to mature enough state that they can get taken serious enough within their business to get people and time and money into a project. And one of the problems we see actually is people solve that issue by trying to go around it.
To avoid it.
Small budget, let's just do a few assets. Let's not involve a project team. When you come and show us what you can do, because when you do your magic, then the management will go, oh, okay, we'll do this, but we know that doesn't work. You can't, it's because predictive maintenance is an activity, not a piece of technology. They have to test it properly. So that's the first set. The second set is that first bit we talked about, which is data. So you can go through that whole process, but if you take some of the clients that we've worked with start with nothing. They have no data. There's nothing coming off their machines. There's no PLC data. There was nothing for us to begin to start a project on. So their state of data readiness at that point is basically zero. But coupled with our attitude, you wouldn't describe it as that because it's very easy solvable. If they've written their project plan well enough, it might simply be a case of us as a company coming in, well, not just Senseye, but coming in with the CMS range of sensors, or one of our great partner companies who are Senseye ready.
Okay.
But that's the next layer of having to have data, and then of course that data needs to be formatted and it needs to be communicated to us, and that can be done quite simply, but it can also be made devilishly complicated with the wrong architecture. So there needs to be some readiness about how you're going to communicate the data, and so challenges are signing off a project, getting it taken seriously, having data available, having to do some spend or some retrofit or data seeking or scraping from PLCs, and then the bit of how you get that data meaningfully out of the business and into Senseye or into a predictive maintenance platform. And by the time you've done all of that, you haven't actually achieved anything yet. All you've done is set a system up that is making available, I hope I'm not putting anybody off, but is making available a platform, and that's when it starts. That's when your users need to actually get engaged and start looking at the cases that are being raised and using them to avoid negative outcomes. And that's the bit that we've focused on the least in this conversation, which is my fault because I'm the one who's responding to your questions, but I think that's reflective of where we are as a market.
Okay.
So actually, if we can use that as a measure, another measure would be, how do we know when the market's really ready? It's when it's assessed by the user. And we haven't reached that point yet. We drag the users in sometimes and say, here's the system you're going to use. When in fact, a really, really good project starts with the user at the middle of it, and they're part of the deployment, part of the requirements gathering.
Yeah. I mean, it's having that engagement from the very start, isn't it?
Yes.
Because then you can actually see the value of predictive maintenance, and actually, that's why you touched on the point of asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think just to touch on what we said before about this whole one size doesn't fit all, asking the right questions really helps to actually engage with the bigger picture and how it's actually going to help.
Yeah.
So I always think that's quite interesting as well, and to involve key stakeholders within this project.
Yeah.
It just goes to show, I mean, people do make this assumption around predictive maintenance being very complex, and I think personally, in all fairness, it is complex. It's not as straightforward as, something
more complex.
something more complex.
A Rubik's Cube. Yeah. No, you're right. And I think, but actually, if we think about all the things you talked about being complex, none of them are the user bit. It's like, if you look at, in psychology, when you're talking about the things that we have to have drive to do, like the obvious one, and drinking water and eating food, the vast majority of the stuff that we engage in as animals is the preparatory stuff. Consumption is easy. Doing the obvious stuff and drinking water and eating food are easy things to do.
Yeah.
And in the case of drug reward and dependency, smoking cigarettes, taking any addictive substance, consumption of it is easy, but people invest a lot of time and energy in the neurotics of going and getting those things. And these projects are exactly that, right? So we talked about the 90% of the stuff over here and coming through, and then the usage bit in theory is easy. But if our projects start off by looking at this part, they're going to be much healthier.
Yeah. If
they're based on the user and the usage.
Okay.
That's what we need to get to.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I mean, just to hold on, let me just do that bit again. No, that's great, Nat. I appreciate your insights into going over key challenges. Just for the benefit of our audience, if you could just summarise those challenges
Yeah.
That would be great, just to give a quick high level.
Well, let's summarise challenges and readiness all in one.
Okay.
So I guess if we talk about the challenges, the readiness is how well prepared people are to meet those challenges. So the challenges are, let's start with understanding what it is you're looking at by, what is predictive maintenance, having a mature appreciation. So all that stuff, investigative, being able to speak to lots of vendors, learning how to compare and contrast. Then the bit of being able to take that information and turn it into some meaningful communication internally, so you can get all your stakeholders on site. So you start the right kind of project when you've selected a vendor. And then there's the challenges and the maturity around data.
Okay.
And then there's the maturity and about implementation processes and integration, and then there's usage. And my final summary on that point would be that it's the usage we should be focused on, but we have to go through these parts.
Yeah.
But I think, if we look in 5 years, I would think that a lot of this would have been knocked out. There'll be people who have a title within a business who part of their responsibility is sorting a lot of this stuff out because you know that it's needed, rather than us having to evangelise about the need for those things.
Okay. So that's great, Nat. Thank you for talking about the key challenges. And, I guess when it comes to anything, there is always pros and cons. So this takes me to my next question around what are the key benefits when it comes to deploying predictive maintenance? And, just touching on that, one thing I would like to maybe go into a bit more detail around is it dependent on key verticals? Is there something that seems to be coming up more because of the demand, for example, maybe in automotive or food and bev or, metals and mining? So just to go over that would be great, just to get some insights into it.
Sure. Okay. But in its simplest possible form, predictive maintenance is about alerting maintenance folk very early on to signs of change that might lead to something negative.
Okay.
So it's not about an alarm because something started burning or something's breached the threshold. You can talk about thresholds, but fundamentally it's about very, very early signs of change from condition data that our solution, or a predictive maintenance solution, can allow maintenance folk to have that early insight that allows them to do something meaningful ahead of time.
Okay.
That's like the kind of base layer.
Yeah.
And I think people overcomplicate it. People describe it as failure prediction, etc. It's not. So is that a benefit or is that just a feature? I'd say it's a feature and it's also a benefit. Let's not get too obsessed about the difference between those things. But what happens next is that when deployed properly and when trusted in a company where a maintenance team know that cases equal likely need for a bit of maintenance.
Okay.
And they also know that lack of cases, where the 98% of assets that don't have cases on them, means a likely, it's okay to reduce your PMs, it's okay to not go and touch things when they don't need touching. Those two things in combination mean that maintenance teams become better at making decisions about maintenance processes.
Okay.
They're more in time, they're more on top of things that need doing, they're not doing things that don't need doing, they become more in control of their inventory because they're more aware of what they're going to need to have in their inventory. And then you get the next layer on the top of that, which is that things like remote workers are better catered for because they're more clued up on what things are going to need to be done, rather than just having a blind list of things that actually they could have not done. That has a knock-on effect for things like safety, because a lot of these environments that we go and speak to people about, you don't want to go and get involved if you don't have to.
Yeah.
So just from a safety perspective, or knowing, going into an environment, an occasional environment, and knowing that there's already some degradation, for example. So that next layer is safety. And then the effect of what we do overall makes a company more efficient. And companies that are more efficient and don't have issues, for example, having to travel across country or across continents sometimes with replacement pieces of kit, can start to look at this project or these projects feeding into their sustainability overarching things. So, it's like an onion. You start off with this premise that predictive maintenance is about alerting maintenance folk to the early signs of change. And from that, you can grow these layers of benefit, of advantage. As we mentioned earlier, another layer is that you can reduce your insurance exposure.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of things that can happen which are beneficial as a result of implementing predictive maintenance. if done right and done modestly and done with a clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve. So you asked about what are the benefits, and then what was the other aspect of it you asked?
So it was just around key verticals. Just touching into that topic around, automotive, food and bev. I mean, it depends, but I think the good thing to note is when it does come to deploying predictive maintenance, it can feed into all of those verticals.
Absolutely. So in a way, if you look at all those verticals, if you took a list of the assets that they work on, and then you took away some of the complex naming conventions, you'd find that there's commonality right through. So motors, conveyors, bearings, etc. And then you'll find, in food and bev, there's some weird nuanced things, but at the core of it, there's a lot of commonality. So they could all, and basically any maintenance team who are working on a set of machines that periodically break down can have all those advantages. There's different orders of scale in terms of the potential return on investment.
Yeah.
If you turn a line off in an automotive plant, you're really going to upset a lot of people to the tune of millions of pounds. There are verticals where downtime's not an issue, for example. There's some verticals where they cannot have downtime, so the benefit we bring is not related to downtime, it's about efficiency of maintenance, etc. So there's a difference in verticals in those degrees, but they're outweighed by the commonalities. There's order of magnitude is different, but the common, the experience of a maintenance person, whether it's in a coal mine or in a contact lens factory, there are common points, and they're the ones that we address.
Yeah. And that ties it all up, I think, when it comes to key verticals. Like I said, it is very similar in a way. Maybe, one of the biggest differences is asset types, because across those key verticals, the assets will be different, right?
Well, yes and no. So they'll be different when you're looking at it as a whole, but when you break down those assets to the fundamental blocks, you realise there's an awful lot of commonality.
Yeah.
So the things that we see in food production are the same assets that you get at a base level, the same things you find in a steel plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any particular trends that you've noticed when dealing with different types of verticals? Something that seems to come up across most of them, or? Yeah,
I mean, steel is one of those industries that's been in desperate need of becoming more green.
Okay.
And so that often will be your angle in or the way that you're invited in to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical, there's huge benefit for pharmaceutical. I'll try that again. There's huge benefit through pharmaceutical in using a predictive maintenance solution. The challenge in pharmaceutical is that everything they do has to be trialled properly over a very long period of time before it can go live because of the nature of what they're producing. But yeah, so I think generally though, what you'll see across all the verticals is the interest is going up. That interest will then correlate with better readiness, I hope.
Okay, no, this makes sense. So just tying up this topic around the state of readiness of predictive maintenance, I do have a very open discussion topic, and there seems to be a lot of talk around OEMs and machine builders and digital transformation. So it would be really great, Nat, to get your personal opinion on this topic.
Right. Okay, well, the vast majority of the conversations that we have, the vast majority of deployments we have are with end users, so with factories or mines or whatever it might be. So people who are producers of a thing and require a predictive maintenance solution to make better some things we discussed today. It was long-standing thought that OEMs, as people who build the machines that are used by those factories and mines, etc., would be the ones who led the predictive maintenance revolution, because it could be a value add that they brought, that they could actually start to sell the uptime of their machines rather than the machines themselves. And we see that very early on in the aerospace industry, for example, helicopter uptime as opposed to selling helicopters. That hasn't quite happened. And there was a brief pause over that. We're seeing a lot more interest from OEMs now.
Okay.
But I think that interest is driven by the fact that most of their clients are now looking for solutions to use on the machines that they've sold. So in a way, they're being dragged into it.
Right.
What
okay.
the market doesn't need is thousands of solutions, and if each OEM develops their own predictive maintenance platform, it becomes untenable for the clients because they're going to have lots of different systems to log into. So the opportunity and the responsibility of a company like Siemens is to work with the OEMs and the end users to say, here is the compatible predictive maintenance solution that you should be using, whether it's provided from one route or the other,
Okay.
so that people don't get confused by multiple systems.
Fine. Okay.
That's my view on the OEM market.
Thank you, Nat, for your insights into this topic around the state of readiness of predictive maintenance in the UK region. Really great to get your opinions on some of the topics which have been raised. So thank you once again for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. A big thank you to our audience who tuned in on today's episode. Please like and subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for the next one in the series. Thank you.
Make sure you like and subscribe on all major podcast channels. And to find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance, go to Siemens.com.